A spoiled and arrogant young millionaire pushes a magnificent thoroughbred horse into the sea, in an area known to be infested with great white sharks. Tied up and desperate, the horse struggles to stay afloat as the predators start circling. Around, drawn by the frantic movement. Alone, exhausted and surrounded by hungry sharks, the horse closes its eyes, ready to accept its fate. But as the creatures move in for the kill, something unexpected happens. Something that will change everything. If you, like us, love animals, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thanks. Let's get back to our story. The morning sun glinted off the enormous windows of the Caldwell mansion, creating a spectacle of light that Arthur completely ignored. Sitting in his Italian leather armchair, the 21-year-old stared blankly at the sprawling lawn, idly swirling the crystal tumbler in his hands. The expensive liquor, like everything else around him, brought him no satisfaction. "Mr. Arthur," called Eleanor, the housekeeper who'd been with him since he was a child, "your parents are on the line." Her voice carried a mixture of affection and concern that only years of acquaintance could build. "Honey, we're just calling to let you know we won't be able to make it back for your birthday next week." Marilyn's voice sounded metallic through the device. "An incredible business opportunity came up in Asia and—" "Arthur, don't start!" Franklin's deep voice dominated the call. "You know we do all this with your future in mind. We've wired some extra money into your account for you to celebrate however you want." "They think they can buy everything with money," Arthur muttered, getting up abruptly. "Eleanor, get the car ready. I'm going out." "Arthur, my man!" exclaimed Rick, raising his champagne flute. "Thought you weren't coming. You missed the qualifying race for my new thoroughbred. First place, of course." The group followed Arthur to the sales sector of the stables, where the most valuable horses were kept. That's when he saw him. Thunder, a magnificent black thoroughbred with a small white marking on his chest. The animal had a majestic bearing, and his eyes seemed to gleam with an intelligence of their own. "Doesn't matter the price," Arthur cut him off. "I want him." What Arthur didn't realize, as he posed for photos next to his new acquisition, was Thunder's gaze. The horse, accustomed to experienced handlers and dedicated caretakers, watched his new owner with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Something in his instinct warned him that this young man did not see him as a living being, but as a trophy. "Get him ready for a race next month," Arthur ordered the groom, without even looking at the animal. "I want all the spotlight on me when Thunder wins his first competition under my ownership." That night, as Thunder adjusted to his new stable, Arthur celebrated with his friends, already planning his rise to the top of high society. What he didn't know was that his obsessive search for recognition would lead him on a journey very different from the one he imagined, one that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. Eleanor, watching her young boss from afar, said a silent prayer. She knew that determined look of Arthur's, the same one that always preceded his biggest recklessness. And something told her that this time, the consequences would be much more serious than any previous whim. The weeks following the purchase of Thunder were marked by a routine that the horse had never experienced. Accustomed to the meticulous care and specialized training of his former owners, the animal now faced neglect disguised as attention. Mike, the oldest groom at the stables, watched with growing concern Arthur's impulsive decisions. "Sir, Thunder needs a period of adaptation before starting intensive training," he argued, whenever he had the opportunity. "He's still getting used to the new environment, the different food." One particularly hot morning, Mike found Thunder restless in his stall. The horse, normally calm and receptive, showed clear signs of stress. He was sweating excessively, pawing the ground frequently, and had only partially touched his feed. The groom decided to try one more time. He found Arthur at the club, surrounded by his usual friends, all laughing and drinking at 10 in the morning. "Actually, sir, that's what I need to talk about," Mike insisted, remaining standing. "Thunder isn't doing well. He's lost weight, isn't eating properly, and the excessive training is—" Rick, Arthur's closest friend, let out a mocking laugh. Didn't I say so? These guys always come up with an excuse when things aren't going well. Next, he'll be saying the horse is emotionally distressed. That's enough! Arthur stood up abruptly, knocking over his tumbler. You're fired, Mike. Pack your things and get off my property by the end of the day. As Mike walked away, Eleanor, who had witnessed the whole scene from afar, felt her heart clench. She had known Mike since Arthur was a child and knew that the groom had genuine love for the animals. Don't you start too, Eleanor, Arthur replied, pouring himself another drink. I'm tired of these people thinking they can tell me what to do. Thunder is mine, and I decide how he should be treated. Thunder accepted the treat gently, his large, expressive eyes fixed on the face of the man who had cared for him since his arrival. Mike realized that the horse had lost even more weight, and his legs showed signs of strain from the excessive training. Mike cast one last look at Thunder before leaving, carrying with him only a backpack with his belongings and the weight of worry about the animal's fate. As he walked down the dirt road leaving the stables, he was certain that something terrible was about to happen. The day of the race dawned with a sky laden with grey clouds, as if nature itself sensed what was to come. The municipal racetrack was packed. The city's elite occupied the luxurious boxes, champagne flutes clinking as animated conversations filled the air. Arthur circulated among the guests with a forced smile, trying to disguise his anxiety with generous doses of alcohol. Thunder is going to show you all what he's capable of, he repeated to anyone who would listen, his voice starting to slur his words. Eleanor watched everything from afar, her heart aching. Since Mike's dismissal, Thunder had been subjected to an even more intense training regime, supervised by a new groom who didn't dare contradict Arthur's orders. The result was visible. The horse, once majestic, now showed clear signs of exhaustion. In the stable area, Thunder was restless. His eyes, normally bright, were dull, and his coat, once lustrous, had lost its shine. The new groom tried to equip him for the race, but the animal kept moving, as if trying to communicate his discomfort. Not another word! Arthur grabbed the reins tightly. I've already lost one employee because of this soft talk. Thunder is going to run, and he's going to win, even if it's the last thing he does. But Arthur was already dragging Thunder out of the stable, ignoring the animal's protests and the worried looks of the other competitors. The sky darkened even more, and the first thunderclaps began to sound in the distance. Thunder was placed in his position at the starting gate, his legs trembling visibly. Beside him, other thoroughbreds awaited the start of the race, their well-cared-for bodies contrasting painfully with the state of the once majestic Thunder. Halfway through the course, as the other horses pulled away, Thunder began to lose speed dramatically. His legs trembled more and more, and his breathing was visibly labored. The public watched in tense silence as the animal struggled to continue. The shouts of horror from the audience echoed through the racetrack. The race was immediately stopped, and the veterinary team rushed to the scene. Arthur, who was watching from the VIP box, felt the world spin around him. Not just from the alcohol, but from the humiliation that unfolded before his eyes. The laughter and malicious comments began to spread through the racetrack. Rick, who moments before was toasting beside Arthur, now moved away discreetly, as if he didn't want to be associated with the fiasco. This animal needs immediate intensive care, declared the chief veterinarian, casting a stern look in Arthur's direction. What have you done to him? He's completely exhausted and malnourished. What no one knew was that that moment of defeat would be just the beginning. In Arthur's mind, a plan was already forming, a plan born of anger, wounded pride, and alcohol. A plan that would forever change the fate of all involved. The night after the race turned into a nightmare that no one at the elite equestrian center would ever forget. Arthur had locked himself in his private penthouse at the club, surrounded by empty bottles and unanswered messages on his cell phone. Social media exploded with videos of Thunder's fall, and the comments were merciless. "Shut up! Arthur's drunken voice thundered from inside the room. "I don't want to hear about that worthless horse. He humiliated me in front of the whole town." Around 11 at night, when the storm was still lashing the region, Arthur finally came out of the room. His eyes were red and unfocused, and he walked unsteadily. "Where's my phone?" he muttered, rummaging through his pockets. "I need to make a call." "Rick, get your dad's yacht to the private dock, now." His voice was strangely calm. "Yes, I know it's raining. I don't care. Bring the others too. We're going to have a party." Before Eleanor could react, Arthur had already gone out into the rain, shouting orders over the phone. She ran to the stable, where Thunder rested under veterinary care, but it was too late. Arthur had arrived first, accompanied by 2 new employees who didn't dare question him. "Mr. Caldwell, no!" Eleanor shouted, running towards them. "You can't do this. Thunder is injured. He needs care." The employees, terrified, began to drag Thunder out of the stable. The horse, still weak from the race, tried to resist, his eyes wide with fear. The rain continued to fall relentlessly, turning the ground into mud. At the club's private dock, Rick waited with his luxury yacht, an imposing vessel that was usually used for high society parties. The storm made the boat rock violently, but that didn't seem to matter to the group of drunken young people who were already on board. The challenge worked. Rick, as immature as Arthur, shrugged and returned to the cockpit. The other young people, although visibly uncomfortable, didn't dare interfere. "My parents?" Arthur laughed, a cold and joyless sound. "They don't even know I exist, and now all of you are going to see what I'm capable of." What she didn't know was that, at that very moment, a small fishing boat was returning to port, and its owner, a simple man named Joe, was about to become the only hope of salvation for Thunder. Joe Silver never cared about bad weather. In his 40 years as a fisherman, he had learned that sometimes the best fishing happened precisely on the most turbulent nights. On this particular night, however, something worried him. The sea was different, more agitated than normal, and a strange feeling tightened his chest. "It's time to go back, old man," he muttered to himself, adjusting the small wooden boat that had been his livelihood for decades. The Sea Star wasn't much, but it had fed his family for generations and had never let him down. "That's not possible," he muttered, turning his face against the rain and straining his eyes into the darkness. In the distance, the lights of a luxury yacht cut through the night, and even with the distance, Joe could distinguish movement on the deck. Guiding his boat in the direction of the lights, Joe began to hear voices, shouts of young people mixed with laughter and loud music. The sound seemed completely out of place in the middle of the storm. As he approached, the scene that unfolded before his eyes made him hold his breath. On the deck of the yacht, illuminated by powerful spotlights, a group of clearly intoxicated young people surrounded something, or rather, someone. A horse, tied up and terrified, tried to maintain its balance on the wet deck as the boat rocked violently. Joe recognized that voice. It was Arthur Caldwell, the son of businessman Franklin Caldwell. His photos frequently appeared in the society pages of local newspapers, always at parties and high society events. On the yacht, Arthur had approached the horse, staggering dangerously. "Do you know how much you cost me?" he shouted, pointing his finger at the terrified animal. "Do you know how much of my reputation you destroyed today?" "Arthur, man," one of the friends tried to intervene, finally seeming to realize the gravity of the situation. "I think we should go back. This has gone too far." But his voice was swallowed by the sound of the storm and the music. On the deck, Arthur had positioned himself next to Thunder, his face contorted into a mask of hatred and revenge. With a violent shove, Arthur forced Thunder towards the edge of the yacht. The horse, still tied and unable to defend himself, lost his balance on the wet deck. The sound of his body hitting the water echoed in the night like a gunshot. Thunder fought against the waves, his tied body making it impossible to swim properly. The dark water swallowed him and brought him to the surface repeatedly, each movement a silent cry for help. "Hold on tight, you monsters," he muttered through gritted teeth, torn between the desperation to save the animal and the fury against those who had condemned him. This story isn't going to end like this. Time seemed to have frozen as Joe maneuvered his small boat towards the horse. The rain continued to lash down relentlessly, making visibility a constant challenge. Thunder fought against the waves, his powerful body reduced to desperate and uncoordinated movements because of the ropes that bound him. On the yacht, the atmosphere had changed drastically. The laughter gave way to a tense silence, broken only by the sound of the storm and Thunder's anguished neighs. Some of the young people watched the scene in horror, as if they had just awakened from an alcoholic trance to the reality of what they had allowed to happen. But Arthur remained still, a distorted smile on his face as he watched Thunder fight for his life. "He wanted to humiliate me," he muttered, his voice filled with a cruelty that made Rick recoil. "Now he's getting what he deserves." "God help me," he muttered, grabbing a life buoy and a sturdy rope. In a quick movement, he threw the buoy towards Thunder. "Here, buddy, grab this." From the yacht, now a few yards away, came mixed shouts. Some voices called for turning back and helping, others insisted on leaving immediately. Arthur remained silent, watching the scene as if watching a private show. "Come on, old sea star," Joe muttered to his boat as he often did in difficult times. "Don't abandon me now." Thunder, exhausted, clung to the buoy as if he understood that this was his only chance of survival. His eyes, large and expressive, fixed on Joe with a mixture of fear and trust that broke the old fisherman's heart. The yacht had disappeared into the darkness, taking with it Arthur and his friends. Joe knew that this story couldn't end like this. Someone needed to be held accountable for such cruelty. "Eleanor!" shouted Joe, recognizing a solitary figure on the pier. "Eleanor, call for help!" "Who did this?" asked one of the police officers, approaching Joe as the veterinarians began to care for Thunder. As the first rays of the sun began to break the horizon, Joe remained beside Thunder, who was receiving initial care. The old fisherman knew that that night had changed many lives, his own, the horses, and certainly Arthur Caldwell's. But something told him that the story wasn't over yet. The news spread through the town like wildfire. The local newspapers were talking about nothing else. Caldwell heir attempts to drown thoroughbred in act of cruelty. Social media exploded with videos recorded by Arthur's own friends during the incident, clearly showing his face and his actions. Franklin Caldwell was in an important meeting in Singapore when he received the call from Eleanor. The businessman, known for his unwavering composure, felt his legs weaken as he heard the account of what his son had done. Thunder had been taken to the best veterinary clinic in the region. Dr. Martinez, an equine specialist, spent the entire night caring for him, treating not only the physical injuries, but also the animal's evident trauma. Joe shook his head, humble as always. "I only did what any decent person would do. The real hero was himself," he replied, pointing to Thunder, who was resting in a specially prepared stall. "I've never seen so much will to live." "Arthur?" Eleanor knocked softly on the door. "Your father is arriving. His plane lands in an hour." At the veterinary clinic, a small crowd was forming. People brought carrots, apples, and other treats for Thunder, leaving cards and messages of support. Among them was Mike, the former groom, who had rushed to see his beloved horse as soon as he heard what had happened. Mike sighed, stroking Thunder's neck through the bars of the stall. "The important thing is that he's alive, and that maybe finally some people will learn that money doesn't give you the right to mistreat living beings." "Where is he?" asked Franklin, his voice controlled but filled with a contained fury. "Dad, he began, but Franklin raised his hand, silencing him. Arthur began to cry, not the manipulative tears he used to use to get what he wanted, but a real cry, born of shame and regret. At that moment, in the veterinary clinic, Thunder finally managed to sleep peacefully under the attentive care of Joe and Mike. The old fisherman and the experienced groom had formed a silent alliance, determined to ensure that the horse never again suffered at the hands of people who saw him only as an object. What none of them knew was that that day would mark the beginning of a profound transformation, not only in Arthur's life, but in the lives of all involved. A transformation that would prove that sometimes you have to lose everything to find your true worth. The first week after the incident completely transformed Arthur's life. Franklin, determined to teach his son a lesson, took drastic measures. First, he blocked all of Arthur's bank accounts, leaving him only with a debit card with a controlled daily limit. Then, he cancelled his access to the club, took away his luxury cars, and most importantly, determined that he should work at the equestrian center, not as an owner, but as an employee. "You're going to start from scratch," declared Franklin during breakfast, while Arthur stared incredulously at the work overalls on the table. "And when I say scratch, I mean literally scratch. You're going to clean the stalls, load hay, learn every aspect of animal care." The news fell like a bomb. Mike, the groom Arthur had unfairly fired, would now be his boss. The young man felt his face burn with shame as he remembered how he had treated the employee. "He's responding very well to treatment," commented Dr. Martinez, watching Thunder accept a carrot from Joe's hand. "But the psychological trauma, that will take longer." Arthur's first day at work was a humiliating and revealing experience. Dressed in simple overalls, with rubber boots on his feet, he introduced himself to Mike at 5 in the morning, the time when the equestrian center's routine began. The following hours were a test of physical and emotional endurance. Arthur, who had never done manual labor in his life, discovered muscles he didn't know existed. His hands, once soft and well-groomed, began to blister. The days turned into weeks. Slowly, something began to change in Arthur. The hard work, which initially seemed like an unbearable punishment, began to give him a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, he was actually learning something useful. Mike, watching closely, noticed the change. The arrogant young man who used to shout orders now asked, listened, tried to understand. On a particularly cold morning, Mike found him arriving earlier than scheduled, preparing hay for the horses. Arthur stopped his work, thinking for a moment. "You know what's hardest? It's not the heavy lifting. It's looking into the horse's eyes every day and remembering what I did to Thunder. How could I have been so monstrous?" "He needs to trust humans again," explained Joe to Dr. Martinez, "and he needs a place to call home." Joe listened attentively as Franklin explained his plan. It was a bold idea, which could change not only Thunder's fate, but also that of Arthur, Joe, and everyone involved in that story. Franklin's proposal was as unexpected as it was transformative. Seated in the veterinary clinic office, he laid out his plan to Joe, Mike, and Dr. Martinez. Joe and Mike exchanged surprised glances. The old fisherman, who had never worked with horses before the incident with Thunder, felt his heart race with the possibility. "I want you to be our expert in emotional rehabilitation," he explained. "I saw how Thunder responded to your care. You have a natural gift for it, Joe. And Mike," he continued, turning to the experienced groom, "you would be our technical director, responsible for all practical aspects of animal care." Franklin took a deep breath before answering. "Arthur will be a fundamental part of the project, but first he needs to prove that he deserves this chance." Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. Despite all the changes of the past few weeks, he still felt insecure in his father's presence. To his surprise, upon entering the office, he found not only Franklin, but also Joe, Mike, and Dr. Martinez. In the following minutes, Arthur listened in silence as his father explained the Recovery Center project. His heart beat faster and faster as he realized the magnitude of the idea. Arthur felt tears forming in his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. "I want to try," he replied sincerely. "I need to try." "That's exactly why," completed Mike. "Your redemption starts with him. If you can regain Thunder's trust, you'll prove that you've really changed." Arthur looked out the office window, observing the horses in the pasture. He remembered how he used to see them only as status symbols, as objects to display his wealth. Now, after weeks of caring for them, he was beginning to understand their nobility, their sensitivity, their capacity to forgive. Joe smiled, that wise smile that seemed to carry all the goodness of the world. Then start tomorrow. Thunder will be transferred to the equestrian center, and you'll be there to receive him, not as his owner, but as someone who wants to learn to be better. As he left the office, Arthur felt something different in his chest. It was no longer the weight of guilt that had accompanied him in recent weeks, but a new, almost unfamiliar feeling. Hope. Hope that perhaps it wasn't too late to change, to learn, to grow. At the veterinary clinic, Thunder rested in his stall, oblivious to the decisions that would change his fate. But somehow, as if he sensed that something important was about to happen, his eyes shone with a new energy. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but also the possibility of a fresh start for everyone. The morning of Thunder's transfer dawned clear and crisp, with a gentle breeze that made the leaves of the trees dance softly. Arthur had arrived at the equestrian center even before sunrise, his heart beating erratically in his chest. He spent hours preparing a special stall, meticulously following Mike's instructions on how to make the environment as welcoming as possible. Terrified, admitted Arthur, running his hand through his hair. What if he recognizes me? What if he panics just seeing me? Joe was the first to get out, followed by Dr. Martinez. Mike was already on site, supervising the final preparations. Thunder was led out of the trailer with extreme care, his steps still a little hesitant, but much firmer than in recent weeks. Thunder explored his new environment with cautious curiosity, his ears moving in all directions, capturing every sound. When his eyes met Arthur's, the horse stopped. The moment seemed to stretch out infinitely. Talk to him, encouraged Joe, softly. Thunder stopped a few feet from Arthur, still studying him. The young man, following an impulse, slowly knelt on the grass, making himself smaller, less threatening. It was then that something happened that no one expected. Thunder, with deliberate steps, approached until he was less than 3 feet from Arthur. He lowered his majestic head and, to everyone's amazement, blew softly into the young man's hair. Arthur remained still, barely daring to breathe. Thunder continued nearby, occasionally touching him with his muzzle, as if relearning his scent, his presence. The following days established a new routine. Arthur arrived before dawn, always accompanied by Joe or Mike, to care for Thunder. Little by little, the horse began to show signs that he accepted his presence, sometimes even looking for him when he heard his voice. "I'm not," replied Arthur, gently stroking the horse's neck, "and I never will be." "Do you think it's time for us to start the second phase of the project?" asked the businessman. The official announcement of the Thunder Equine Recovery Center took place on a Saturday morning, 3 months after the incident that almost cost the horse his life. The equestrian center was unrecognizable. A new wing had been built especially to receive rescued horses, with spacious stalls and adapted recovery areas. "I can't believe that all of this started with an act of cruelty," commented Eleanor, helping to arrange the chairs for the inauguration ceremony. "It's as if the universe has transformed something terrible into something wonderful." "You more than deserve it," replied Joe, approaching with Thunder by his side. The horse, now fully recovered, walked with his usual elegance, but there was something different in his behavior, a serenity that only time and true love can bring. Arthur hesitated, looking at the audience. He saw faces that had once scorned him, people who had every right to doubt him. He took a deep breath and began, "A few months ago, I was a different person. Someone who thought that money and status were everything in life. Someone who saw animals as objects, as symbols of power. It took making the worst mistake of my life to understand the true value of things," Arthur continued, his voice choked with emotion. "It took almost losing my humanity to truly find it, and I owe that to many people. to my father, who had the courage to punish and guide me, to Eleanor, who never gave up on me, to Mike, who taught me the true meaning of caring, and especially to Joe, a simple man who risked his life to save Thunder, and without knowing it, ended up saving me too. Silent tears streamed down Eleanor's face. Franklin pursed his lips, trying to contain his emotion. Joe, in his characteristic humility, just smiled, one hand resting on Thunder's neck. This center is not just a place to recover injured horses, Arthur continued. It's a place of transformation. Every animal that arrives here will have the chance that Thunder had, to trust again, to heal, to start over. And every person who works here will have the chance that I had, to learn, to grow, to become someone better. When Arthur finished his speech, the silence was broken by emotional applause. Thunder, as if understanding the importance of the moment, neighed softly, making everyone smile. Joe approached the mare with his characteristic calm demeanor. "Hello, little one. Welcome to your new home." Arthur watched the scene with a full heart. He remembered his own weeks of adaptation, the fear of not being accepted, the gratitude for the second chance. Now, seeing Thunder help another frightened animal, he understood that the circle was closing. The sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky with golden hues. In the pasture, specially prepared for the recovering horses, Thunder and Star grazed side by side, two wounded souls finding comfort in each other. 6 months after the inauguration of the recovery center, the place had already transformed into a true sanctuary. 15 rescued horses occupied the stalls, each with their own story of overcoming adversity. Thunder had become a kind of natural leader, always the first to greet the newcomers, always present in the most difficult moments of each animal's recovery. On a particularly busy morning, Eleanor ran to the office where Arthur was working on horse tracking reports. "Arthur, you need to see this," she said, breathless. "It's about Rick." On the screen, a live news report showed Rick being taken away by police officers. The headline was clear: Santos heir arrested for organizing illegal horse races. Arthur sat heavily in a chair, feeling the weight of memories. That could have been him, that almost was him. Arthur looked at Joe, then at Mike, and finally at Eleanor. He didn't need to say anything. Everyone knew what needed to be done. Arthur nodded, rising with determination. "Thunder taught me that sometimes we need to face our fears to help others." What they found on site was devastating. The horses were in deplorable conditions, many showing clear signs of doping and poorly cared for injuries. Seeing that made Arthur relive his own cruelty of months ago, but now with a completely different perspective. The rescue work lasted all day. Each animal needed to be evaluated, stabilized, and prepared for transport. Arthur worked tirelessly, applying all the knowledge he had acquired in recent months. "He knows," commented Joe, observing the horses' behavior. "He knows exactly what they're going through." To his surprise, Thunder approached the stall where Tempest was, as if wanting to confirm Arthur's words. The two horses looked at each other for a long moment, and something seemed to pass between them. A silent understanding, a promise of better days. Arthur looked at his father, then at Joe, who was smiling his usual wise smile. "It's not just a chance to correct mistakes," he replied. "It's a chance to make a difference. For real." A year had passed since the night Thunder almost lost his life at sea. The Equine Recovery Center, which began as a redemption project, was now nationally recognized as a reference in the treatment and rehabilitation of traumatized horses. More than 50 animals had already passed through its facilities, each carrying their own story of overcoming adversity. On a particularly meaningful morning, Arthur was in his office, now very different from the luxurious environment he used to frequent. The walls were decorated with photos of the recovered horses, each image telling a story of transformation. On his desk, next to the computer, rested the old silk tie he wore on the day of the race, a constant reminder of the man he used to be. To his surprise, Mike entered the office accompanied by an elderly woman, her eyes brimming with emotion. "This is Mrs. Carmen," introduced Mike. "She's Star's former owner, our first rescue." Come, invited Arthur gently. Let's visit Star. I think she'll be very happy to see you. She's been a great teacher for our other horses, explained Arthur, especially for the older ones we rescue. Together with Thunder, she helps the newcomers adapt. At that moment, Joe approached, carrying some training equipment. Mrs. Carmen, what a pleasure to meet you. Arthur, I think it's time we showed her the work Star has been doing with the children. I never imagined, said Mrs. Carmen, watching as Joe prepared Star for a demonstration. When I was forced to sell the farm, I thought I was condemning her to a sad end. But look at her. She's found an even greater purpose. Arthur's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. We're expanding the center. We're going to open a groom school, specializing in the rehabilitation of traumatized horses. Mike will be the technical director, and Joe... Arthur exchanged a meaningful look with his father before answering. I'll coordinate the awareness program, traveling the country, telling our story, mine and Thunder's, and helping to prevent other horses from suffering what he suffered. Thunder, as if understanding that they were talking about his companions, neighed softly. He had become a kind of living symbol of hope, not only for the other horses, but for all the people who knew his story. Arthur felt his eyes fill with tears. You're right, and every day here is a new chance to transform more crooked lines into stories of love and redemption. It was the 2nd anniversary of the Thunder Equine Recovery Center, and the place was decorated for a special celebration. Colorful banners fluttered in the gentle morning breeze, and the aroma of fresh hay filled the air. Dozens of people circulated through the stables and training areas, many of them families who had adopted horses rehabilitated by the center. Arthur, now 23 years old, looked like a completely different person from the arrogant young man he used to be. His hands, once soft and well-groomed, now displayed calluses from honest work, and his eyes carried a wisdom that only true transformation can bring. Joe, who had just arrived with his family, now an integral part of the center's team, smiled his characteristic smile. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom to find the strength to climb up. Hey, buddy, whispered Arthur, hugging the animal's neck. I needed to see you before starting. You know it's all because of you, don't you? Father and son walked together to the main area, where a small crowd was already gathering. Among those present were veterinarians, grooms, adoptive families, and, to the surprise of many, some of Arthur's old friends, not to mock, but to learn. Mike took to the small stage first to present the center's numbers. Over 200 horses rescued, 80 registered adoptive families, 30 graduates from the specialized groom program. Each statistic represented a transformed life, a story of redemption. I want you to see something, he said, his voice filled with emotion. Something that Thunder taught me and that changed my life forever. Look at them, Arthur continued. Each of these horses arrived here broken, scared, disbelieving in humans, just as I was broken, scared, and disbelieving in myself. But Thunder, his voice faltered for a moment. Thunder showed me that there's always room for forgiveness, for a fresh start, for love. You know what's most beautiful? Asked the old fisherman. It's that now you are also a beacon of hope for others. Sometimes I wonder, said Arthur, watching Thunder interact gently with some children who were participating in the celebration, if he really forgave me, or if he just understood that I needed a chance to be better. The celebration continued throughout the day, with demonstrations of equine therapy, presentations by the students of the groom course, and moving stories of recovery. But the most touching moment was when Thunder, on his own initiative, approached a newly arrived horse who was watching everything frightened from his stall. Arthur nodded, feeling his heart overflowing with gratitude. And that's what we'll continue doing, isn't it? One day at a time, one horse at a time, one person at a time.